One.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Cohen, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Canadian Psychological Association.
And my name is Judi Malone, and I'm the Chair of the Council of Professional Associations of Psychologists. Together, we co-sponsor the CPA, CPAP Liability Insurance Program.
Judi and I will be moderating today's 30-minute session. We'll be discussing the current state with COVID-19, telepsychology, and business interruption insurance. You will hear brief statements from BMS Risk Services and Gowling WLG on this topic. Following that, we'll be asking BMS and Gowling questions that we've received from our members over the past few days. Please note we will not be taking questions live from attendees during this webinar. However, at the end of the session, we will share more information on who to contact with additional questions. In addition, we'll be recording the webinar today, and it will be made available to members of CPA and members of the member organizations of CPAP.
I'd like to now introduce our speakers. Brian Gomes is the President and CEO of BMS Canada Risk Services, a specialist insurance brokerage that works exclusively with CPA, CPAP, and more than 70 associations and member-driven organizations across the country. BMS continues to work closely with its various partners and stakeholders, including CPA, CPAP, during this time in particular, so that we can bring our members information in relation to COVID-19 and the CPA, CPAP Liability Insurance Program. Andrew McKenna is a partner in Gowling's WLG Ottawa office. Andrew's practice focuses on medical defense litigation and health law. As counsel for physicians and other healthcare professionals in both civil and regulatory matters, Andrew has appeared in all levels of court in Ontario, as well as in discipline committee matters, hospital board proceedings, and before various other administrative tribunals. I'll now turn over the session to Brian and Andrew.
Thank you very much, Karen and Judi, and to all members for taking the time to view this webinar in what is an exceptionally challenging situation. At every moment, there are new circumstances arising and questions being posed that the insurance industry has never faced in relation to COVID-19. Whether you're a clinic owner, employee, or independent practitioner, there's significant uncertainty as the evolving situation impacts and looks to redefine insurance coverage. Our volume in the past 10 days has exceeded what we would receive on average in a 2-month span from both emails and incoming calls. We appreciate your inquiries and also your patience during this time as we actively work to obtain and share as much information as possible. We are working around the clock to review all policy wordings, to advocate on your behalf to insurers, and to try and identify potential avenues of coverage and seek further coverage clarification from insurers. All the while, we recognize the importance of providing this to you in a timely manner. Through this process, the response time is being delayed given the fluid and truly unprecedented nature of COVID-19 and the multitude of positions being taken. All of this in conjunction with the sheer volume of queries being sent in. We have added additional resources and are engaging with our legal partners such as Gowling and your association to provide timely content and valuable resources. There are definitions and policy wordings that are being challenged in ways that have never been. And through claims being brought forward in the coming months and challenged in court, we expect to see new precedents set. For example, can a virus be deemed to inflict physical damage on a premises? We are still in the early phases of this circumstance. A situation excluded under a policy today may be covered in the near future based on government and public health classifications at the time, which are also changing as the severity of the circumstance escalates. We have now created a more formal position statement with CPA and CPAP, which was shared with members last week. This statement provides further insight and feedback on key coverage areas, including business interruption, professional liability, and commercial general liability insurance protection. We strongly encourage you to review this document. Unfortunately, we are unable to provide broad, definitive answers on coverage in this forum, given the unique differences of each claim. These will ultimately play themselves out as claims and cases arise. We will, however, provide our interpretation on a general basis to a variety of areas that psychologists and other healthcare professionals are seeking feedback. As the broker, BMS Canada does not adjudicate or determine claims. This is up to the insurer. Each claim will be assessed on its own merit based on the specific facts of the situation. We will, however, advocate to insurers on your behalf individually and collectively as best we can in collaboration with our partners and your associations. We are currently monitoring claims that are being submitted and reviewing the feedback and responses being set by insurers. The webinar will provide more content and detail as it relates to risks specific to COVID-19 and the key coverages that members have purchased through the insurance program based on what we know today. As the situation evolves, we will continue to create further resources and bring you this information given the potential impacts it may have on your insurance coverage. We strongly recommend that you visit your government, college, and associations websites for important notices and updates as it relates to your practice. Upon reading the position statement that's been developed and viewing this webinar, if you are looking to submit a claim, there is now a designated portal that's been set up by your insurer for business interruption insurance, details of which we will make available on the website. I will now pass to Andrew, and then I look forward to answering specific questions related to the insurance program and coverage that may be available.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. As Judi mentioned, I'm a partner at Gowling's in the Ottawa office, and our lawyers provide legal assistance to members of the CPA through your insurer. In the light of the rapidly evolving nature of the situation, it's important that you make efforts to keep up to date on the latest developments. Our office has been monitoring the websites of all of the colleges across the country, and all of the colleges have been providing guidance as to how to navigate the numerous issues that have arisen. In addition to the colleges, the Canadian Association, provincial associations have also been good in updating members. In light of the time we have today, I'm going to be focused on the issue of the provision of psychological services through telepsychology today. However, if you have any questions regarding professional liability that do not get answered during this webinar, I encourage you to reach out to our pro bono hotline. The lawyers in our office and our other locations across the country are ready and able to assist you with whatever professional liability questions you have, and we'll provide the number at the end of the webinar today. Telepsychology is something that has been contemplated and used by psychologists for a number of years in Canada, so this is not something that is new. However, the recent pandemic has thrust it into the spotlight as one of the only alternatives available in order to provide care to your clients. And there's lots of guidance out there for you to consider and look at if you are considering utilizing this technology. There's a few things I would recommend to you. I would direct you to the model standards for telepsychology in Canada, which was issued by the Association of Canadian Psychological Regulatory Organizations in 2011. You can also look to your own particular college. For example, the college in British Columbia has a very good checklist of things you need to consider before offering telepsychology. The college in Ontario has adopted the model standards, which I just referenced from ACPRO. And the college in Alberta has the practice guidelines, and it's an 8-page document that is fairly comprehensive that were approved in 2018 for the provision of telepsychology. There are a number of things you need to think about before offering services, and I'll talk at a very high level today. Obviously, you should consult your local resources in order to ensure you're in compliance. I appreciate the current environment may lead you to want to rush out and start offering your services electronically in order to ensure your clients are receiving their services they need and try and mitigate the impact it's having on your business. However, you need to ensure that if you're going to start offering services to clients remotely, that you are doing so in a way that does not run afoul of the standards and guidelines applicable to you in your jurisdiction. You cannot assume that simply because of the extraordinary nature of the situation that your regulator is going to be flexible or turn a blind eye if you do not follow the applicable standards and guidelines. And you not only have to be cognizant of your own regulator, but also of the Provincial Privacy Commissioner, because the use of telepsychology also raises additional issues with respect to the protection of confidential information. In terms of what you should be thinking about if you are considering offering services remotely, here are some of the things you need to consider. And this is not an exhaustive list, but is a good start. If you are considering offering telepsychology, then the first thing you should be asking yourself is whether it is appropriate for the client. You have an accountability to make sure your decisions are always in your client's best interest and are aligned with your client's expectations of care. Are there physical, cognitive, or sensory deficits that may make the delivery of psychological services unsafe or ineffective? Ask yourself, what is it that the client needs? Do you have the skills and training to be able to offer these services electronically? Is the client able to provide you with informed consent? Does the client understand that there are limitations to what you may be able to offer remotely? Does the client have access to someone physically present in their location that they can access and have them assist if necessary? Do you have a plan in place in case of an emergency? Do you have the necessary technology to carry out the services that you want to offer? Does the client have the necessary technology? Is the technology you're using secure? Can you maintain privacy? Do you have a backup plan if you lose the connection or are otherwise unable to complete your session? Is it compliant with the applicable privacy legislation in your jurisdiction? Is it in compliance with the guidelines from your college? You need to be confident that the manner in which you provide these services is at the same level as it would be if you were doing so face-to-face. If you believe that the level of service would be below what you could offer face-to-face, then you need to ask yourself whether you should be doing so remotely. Hopefully, I'll be able to speak to some of these issues in more detail when we answer the questions which have been posed. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Brian and Andrew, for that great introduction and coverage of the issues that we should be thinking of at the get-go. We had a few questions that have come in from members, and Judi and I will take turns asking them of you. So I guess the first one would be more one for BMS. What is business interruption coverage, and what do folks need to be aware of if they're closing their clinics during this time?
Thanks, Karen. First of all, the business interruption coverage and those who have requirements related to a clinic closure in relation to insurance would be those members who have purchased additional coverage for property protection, so that the package that's available to you through the CPA CPAP program. I'll address first the question around vacant properties. As is the case in almost all insurance policies, there is a limitation in the policy as it relates to coverage for a vacant property. A vacant property is defined as a property that has been unoccupied or unvisited essentially for 30 days or greater. Given the circumstances that arise today, the insurer is likely to waive this. However, it is required that members contact us to advise that their premises will be vacant for longer than the 30-day period so that we can notify the insurer and have that request put on record. Out of good practice, if you have the opportunity, it's prudent to check your premises, your clinic setting, as frequently as every 72 hours, if possible, during this circumstance. In relation to business interruption insurance or business income coverage, this is a question that we are being frequently asked at present. So I will get into a bit of detail to articulate what this coverage is and how it may respond for psychologists given today's circumstance. Coverage is generally put under a property policy, and it is triggered when the insured property sustains physical loss or damage that's caused by a specific peril, and a peril being something like fire or wind. So an example could be there was a storm, wind was the peril, and the damage was that the roof came off the building. In a typical scenario, when a business suffers physical damage and the business is no longer able to operate normally, the insurer will pay for both extra costs, extra expenses associated with getting them back on their feet, perhaps renting a new premises, and also with potential loss of business income that has been sustained as a result of the circumstance. What is less common across the insurance industry is coverage for what businesses are facing right now, which is the actual or potential closure due to the spread of COVID-19. Most property policies or package policies have an absolute virus or bacteria exclusion, which states that losses caused directly or indirectly by a virus are excluded from coverage. And these were put into place in the insurance industry following SARS. However, in rare circumstances, some policies write back virus-related coverage that are subject to certain requirements and provisions within the policy. For example, some require that civil authority must have ordered a building closure for coverage to be provided, which is one of the elements uniquely provided within the CPA CPAP program that I'll touch on in more detail. The business package policy that members may have purchased is insured by Aviva Canada. Under this policy, there may be coverage for actual loss or business income caused by an interruption of business when access is restricted to the property in whole or in part by an order of civil authority resulting from an outbreak of a contagious or infectious disease that is required by law to be reported to government authorities. However, as noted, for a successful claim to be provided, it is dependent on several circumstances being satisfied, all of which are fact specific, with the most important one being the order of civil authority. And as you can appreciate, the definition of the order of civil authority is one that is changing very rapidly. So something that could have been an excluded claim yesterday may become a covered claim today. And also the definition of civil authority as it relates to urgent care is something that will certainly be tested. There will be a lot of discussion around how that definition should respond to a policy. Again, each claim will be assessed and interpreted on its own merits through the claims process, but should coverage be afforded, the coverage is restricted to actual loss sustained for a period of up to 60 days. And again, this coverage does include loss of revenue as well. And for those members who have bought this policy, this would be a very generous related element of coverage when comparing across the insurance industry for these circumstances. The policy also includes negative publicity coverage to cover actual loss of business income sustained as a result of, among other things, an outbreak of a contagious or infectious disease within 25 kilometers of the insured premises. That again is required to be reported to government authorities. Should this coverage be afforded, there is also a restriction to actual loss sustained for a period of up to 60 days. Given the widespread nature of COVID-19, it is currently unknown how the insurer will adjudicate coverage in these cases. As a result of the potential scale of loss that insurers are facing, there has also been an embargo put on securing new policies for business interruption insurance under a property policy. So any members who are looking to secure this coverage, please contact us so that we can independently place that coverage for you, because at present you are no longer able to do so through the online automated process. While the CPA CPAP policy does afford some potential coverage, as noted extensively in the media this week, coverage for pandemics are not common in Canada, and most policies have complete exclusions as noted prior. There are already examples of challenges being made which have the potential to set significant precedent in this area. Last week, there was a lawsuit filed by a restaurant chain arguing that the pandemic is worsened by the fact that a virus can stay on a surface or objects for up to 28 days. And the position being taken here is that given it can be a relatively long-lasting a virus, that there may be a need for remediation, and as a result of that, direct physical loss. As well, in that same case today, there is debate and evaluation over the definition of closure by civil authority. And this will be one of many cases that will evolve in the days, weeks, and months ahead. If you believe you have a claim, information on how to submit a claim within the position statement document that we have provided, that is available on the organizations, the provincial and national association website. Aviva have now also set up a dedicated portal to submit claims. If you require any assistance during this process or interpreting a response, please do contact us. Finally, we understand and recognize the significant impact that restrictions related to COVID-19 are having on small business, such as clinics held by members of CPA, CPAP, and the practice owners, the evolving challenges that practice owners have in relation to this. And we will continue to do everything possible to advocate now and in the months to come as it relates to this policy and coverage that may be provided to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I'm not going to give you a break here. I've got another question for BMS. Brian, does my professional liability insurance policy cover me if I'm to work outside my clinic and provide other means of care, such as telepsychology?
There is no, your professional liability policy follows you outside of your clinic, and it even protects you in circumstances where you are perhaps providing pro bono care and those services not specific to a billing relationship, perhaps with a patient. There is no additional restrictions for psychologists delivering their services via telepsychology, as long as the insured is acting within their scope of practice, obviously, and are aware of any jurisdiction restrictions related to their license. There is an article that has been placed on the program website in relation to telepsychology that we recommend reading and reviewing. That will give you more information as it relates to coverage associated with rendering services in this manner.
Thanks very much, Brian. I guess this question is for you too, but I also wanted to just ask you a clarification about the first issue, if we could. When you talked about business interruption coverage, just to be clear, that's for people who've bought the clinic insurance, correct?
Yeah, that's right, Karen. Within the policy, the professional liability policy, which essentially covers psychologists for any potential allegation for an error or omission in the rendering of their professional service, within that policy, members also receive general liability coverage that we can touch on and how that coverage may respond to an incident. But neither of those policies will respond to a business interruption or potential loss of income. The only policy that may respond to that is within the property element of the package policy that's purchased. So this is specific to those members who have bought that clinic package policy that's offered.
Good, thanks for that clarification. So just one more question for you now then. If a client goes to visit a psychologist and unbeknownst to anyone picks up an infection, is there coverage for that?
Yeah, this is a question that we're receiving a high volume of queries about, not only from psychologists, but from a multitude of regulated health professionals. Essentially, there are two different coverages that members have that may respond to a circumstance through the program. The first of which is through your professional liability policy, which, as mentioned, protects you for allegations of negligence causing injury to a third party. There is no exclusion in the policy as it relates to transmission of a virus or disease from the insured during the delivery of professional services. There was historically, but that exclusion was removed a number of years ago. There are standard exclusions in the policy, as you would appreciate, around willful acts and so on. So using common judgment should take should be at the forefront of psychologists' mindset when delivering service. For example, if you are feeling unwell, or are aware that you have COVID-19, you should not be rendering services in person to a patient where they can be affected. The second of which is in relation to the general liability policy, which is also automatically provided to a member when they purchase insurance. And the general liability policy differs from professional liability in that it provides coverage for bodily injury and damage to a third party, but it's not limited to a scope of while rendering or delivering care. So, for example, a situation that could arise is you could have a client in a waiting room, or perhaps a client has a child or a partner in the waiting room of a clinical setting. And while in the waiting room, they believe that they have been infected with the virus, and an allegation is made that the clinic was not properly sanitized, or the receptionist was coughing and maybe was ill. In that type of circumstance, there may also be coverage under a general liability policy. With all of that said, there are some exclusions in the policy. For example, pollution is a common exclusion across a general liability policy, and it is anticipated that this exclusion will be contested and applied in the event that claims are brought forward in relation to general liability losses. So again, as you can appreciate, we are in kind of unprecedented scenario, and a lot of those cases we believe will come forward in a variety of circumstances affecting institutions, professionals, and businesses. And so if you do have an incident that's brought forward against you, or an allegation either through the rendering of your professional service or just simply through your business operation or your clinical operation, please do contact us with those immediately, as there may be protection through your insurance policies.
Thanks again, Brian. I want to build on that question actually, but more specific to psychologists becoming ill. So the question is, if my earnings are negatively impacted by this and I'm required to stop working or reduce my hours, do I have insurance to cover this loss of income or earnings under my professional liability policy?
That's a great question, Judi, and another one that we're getting a lot of queries about. Your professional liability policy that you have essentially is in place to protect you against for allegations made against you by a third party. It is not a first party loss of income type of coverage, which maybe people can see perhaps in a disability type of insurance product. That is not the case under your professional liability. There is some confusion under these policies because there is a element of coverage for loss of earnings. However, that coverage is related to a loss of earnings that may have acquired as a result of a member having to defend themselves against a claim or college complaint. So that would be if there's perhaps a college complaint, that member has to miss a clinic, and there are income that's associated with that. The policy would provide them with that loss of income, but it does not respond in a circumstance where the individual cannot work in relation to a circumstance like COVID-19, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Just going through our list of questions, one of the ones we received from members was whether insurers will pay for services delivered by telehealth. And when doing so, do I have to put on the receipt that it was provided by telehealth? I guess that's less of a question for Brian and Andrew, but I can say that there was one large insurer that just issued an announcement earlier today that they would be covering services delivered virtually, and we will share that information with members following the webinar. CPA has also been in touch with the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association calling on them to consider coverage of telehealth services. And we understand they will be considering that issue. Obviously, there's very many different insurers who cover services. Different employers have different plans and covered by different insurers. But it's certainly something that's been on the radar for the associations. As far as the receipts go, it's probably always a good idea to put as much information as possible on the receipt, so that it was delivered by who, to which people, what kind of service. Indicating that it was done digitally or by telehealth is probably a good idea, because you want to make sure that if it's reimbursed, they know exactly what they're reimbursing. Judi, did you want to add anything to that?
No, but I do really thank CPA for working in regards to the insurers and coverage. Access is a really big issue at this time that we do want to keep straight. Although actually, on the theme of telepsychology, we do have another question that would be a good fit for Andrew McKenna of Gowlings. Andrew, this is another question from a member. How do they choose secure telehealth platforms or telepsychology providers?
Thanks, Judi. There are a number of platforms that are available for telepsychology, and the first question, obviously, is what format are you looking to provide it? Is it by way of video conference? Is it by way of telephone? Obviously, video conference is the better option. It's the more viable option, because you're able to see the client and you can pick up on visual clues, etc., for any issues that may arise. However, I appreciate that's not always an option for you. So if we're talking about video conferencing, though, as I said, there's a number of different platforms, and I'm not here to sell one platform over another. I've spent the last few days looking at different platforms that are out there. There are a number of products available. What you should be looking for when you are considering a platform is, does it have a focus on healthcare providers? I think that's the first thing you should be looking at, because those that focus on healthcare providers are likely going to ensure that it is compliant with the applicable privacy legislation, that is encrypted and it's secure and can address your needs. And you'll find that with some of these platforms, they have an ability not only to be able to see the patient visually, but also take notes and have those stored electronically as well, so that it's all one package. I mentioned encryption, so you need to be looking to make sure that it's encrypted and secure, and how reliable it is. Is it a well-known product or something that you've never heard of before? There's enough information out there on the web that you can educate yourself fairly quickly on this. I know right now that a lot of these platforms are being proactive in advertising and offering discounts or even free use of their service on a limited basis for you to sign up. So there's lots out there for you to look at, and it's just, you need to do the research to make sure that it suits your needs and it provides you with a level of comfort that you can assure you can provide your patient with the services necessary.
Great. Another question for you, Andrew. What's the best way to confirm identity when you're doing telepsychology at each session, and in particular for new clients who? Yeah,
that's a good question, Karen. I know in looking at this, it's typically when we've thought about telepsychology. Prior to this current situation arising, it was in the context of likely having met with your client for the first time personally and obtaining the consent that you need to proceed electronically, and therefore not having to go through the process of obtaining consent. But because you're possibly dealing with a patient for the first time, there are a couple of things you need to be cognizant of. If you look at the model model guidelines or model standards from ACRO, they talk about ensuring that you take steps to confirm the identity of your client, not only at the first session, but going forward. So they recommend coded identification as a way of doing that. And that's to make sure that somebody's not impersonating your client. So agreeing upon a password or a answer to a question that only the client would know and you would know. If you are contacted by a client who wants to utilize services, then our recommendation is that you have a telephone call with them first to discuss the limitations on telepsychology in terms of the limitations on the technology, the potential for a privacy breach. You can take as many steps as you can to mitigate those risks, but because you're using third-party technology, either from a provider or the telephone, there's always that potential for a breach. So the client needs to understand all of that. And doing that by way of a verbal discussion on the phone where you can get that consent and then have the client send you back a written consent form electronically is the best way to approach this. The concern being that even emailing your new client for the first time before you've got consent to communicate with them electronically could give rise to a potential breach of personal health information. So you need to take it step by step, ensure they understand the risks, and then once you have that in place, then you can move forward with getting something in writing and communicating by electronic means and setting up the video conferencing.
Thank you, Andrew. I have another member question for you. In Ontario, Alberta, BC, PEI, a state of emergency has been declared. That's evolving literally as we speak. Is the emergency nature of the circumstances with COVID-19 a mitigating factor in determining what is reasonable and acceptable?
Well, I think it's not so much the emergency nature of the situation. I think it's the particular circumstances of your client that a psychologist needs to be aware of in order to determine what's reasonable and what's not. I think, however a psychologist is going to approach a situation, there needs to be some record of the thought process and the steps that were considered, so that if problems arise down the road, if the college is looking into what occurred, that there is a documentary record that sets out the thought process that was in place. If you're faced with an emergency, then the expectation is going to be that you do as much as you can to ensure that you have consent and that you have a connection which is secure. By asking, you can ask a few simple questions to the client to cover off the most pressing issues in terms of ensuring they're in a secure location, ensuring that there's somebody there or somebody available that can assist if there's a problem, and ensuring that they understand what the limitations are. I think I said at the outset that the colleges are likely not going to turn a blind eye to people not following all the steps that they should. Having said that, if you can show that you've made best efforts to ensure compliance with your obligations and that you've done everything with good intentions, then I think you're mitigating the possibility of problems arising. But it has to be on a case-by-case basis. I don't think the fact that we're facing this pandemic in and of itself gives you reason to not follow the guidelines. It has to be client specific.
Thank you for that. I think that exhausts our member questions, but just before we close up, I think I'll ask you, Brian, Andrew, is there anything you would like to add that maybe you would like to add in addition to what you have already shared with us today?
I think from my perspective, that we do completely recognize the impact that this is having on healthcare professionals including psychologists, and that if there are questions, please do contact us. You know, we are monitoring the impact and effects that you know, government positions being taken by government, and also any financial aid that may be delivered to small business or professionals, and are looking to distribute that information as it comes in with partners like Gowling throughout the process, and that we will be keeping track on claims responses from the insurer, and evaluating what those are like, and discussing with our partner organizations like CPA and CPAP. And then just finally, given the situation is so fluid, please keep in mind a potential claim that you know, could be declined or may not be available under the policy today can evolve into one that is tomorrow. So please do keep in touch with us and monitor your association's website along with BMS for timely information as it's released. And just thank you to those professionals who continue to deliver urgent care in very trying circumstances. You know, it's very much recognized and appreciated, I think, by you know, many Canadians, and including everybody at BMS.
That's great. Andrew, did you want to add anything, or?
Yeah, just two quick points, Karen. First, and we always say paper is a lawyer's best friend, and I can't stress that enough. In this situation, whatever you do, you should be making sure that your documentation is comprehensive and contemporaneous, so that if issues arise down the road, you've got some backup for what has occurred. The other point I was going to make is that you know, we're hearing stories about people not being able to return to the country for various reasons due to travel bans and closing of airports, and the question that I've answered in the past and has come up again is, can you provide services to somebody outside of your jurisdiction? So you're in Ontario or you're in BC and you have a client that's not able to get back or stuck somewhere. The short answer is yes, you can provide services to somebody that's not in the same jurisdiction. However, if we're talking about different jurisdictions in Canada, the rule of thumb is that you need to be licensed not only in your own jurisdiction, but in the jurisdiction where that person is currently located. Given the current situation, I would recommend that if you find yourself in that position, you follow up with the college or the regulator in that jurisdiction just to find out what needs to be done or what accommodations can be made. And the same applies if they're outside of the country, in the US, for example, or elsewhere. You need to follow up with the regulator. You don't want to run into a problem of being subject to an investigation by a regulator in a different jurisdiction if you didn't do the groundwork beforehand. But there is no prohibition on you doing so as long as you've taken those steps. Also, excellent point. I just wanted to mention too, if there's any other additional questions, certainly you can get in touch with BMS at psy.insurance@bmsgroup.com. Questions for Gowling WLG, you can call their hotline, 1-855-441-4424. And you can also feel free to email us at CPA. It would be executiveoffice@cpa.ca. We're very glad to take questions from members of CPA. And because CPA manages the Professional Liability Insurance Committee for both CPA and CPAP, we're also pleased to take questions from members of the provincial and territorial associations as well. Or alternately, of course, you can be in touch with your provincial or territorial association of psychology.
Thanks. You know, I'd like to take this final moment on behalf of Karen and myself for both CPA and CPAP to really sincerely thank Brian and Andrew for today's session. Necessary information in a quickly changing and evolving landscape. So thank you both for making that time to be here with us today and for this recording. I hope that each of you who are listening today found value in this session and can make use of this information during these trying times. Thank you, everyone.